Well, good morning from Philip, myself, on Mirador Television. And it's a surprise event because you have the treat of a midweek appearance from Normandie, from Harry Atherton. And the other treat is that the real anchorman is wearing his deerstalker, which I personally find very amusing. But actually, it rather suits him for some strange reason. The other piece of breaking news, viewers or soon to be listeners, is that Mr. Atherton has had a bath today. He has one every 6 months to ensure that he doesn't smell like a Frenchman too often. And so, yes, he informed me by email that he is, quote, squeaky clean because he's had his 6 monthly bath. Well done, Harry.
Well, I want you to know that I have a bath every 6 months, whether I need one or not.
Oh, well, this is high level hygiene.
Sure.
High level hygiene.
Sure.
It's 5-star.
I try to follow that principle.
I'm rather jealous because the state of my back and my knee, I can't even get in and out of a bath. It has to be a walk-in shower for me. So, yet again, an 88-year-old gentleman is putting me to shame, 22 years younger than him. But there we are, that's life. Well, Harry, has anything struck you since we last spoke that you'd care to talk about?
Well, no, I think the things that are, dominate my thinking these days are so many of these silly legislations that are coming down the pike, whether it's the Scottish hate bill
Yes.
is one. But mind you, we've got to be careful because we may make fun of them. That bill is obviously going to be withdrawn fairly soon. It's just so silly. But we've got a creeping threat from legislation in England as well, as new laws come onto the statute books, hate laws, so I don't think we should be too proud of our record. Freedom of speech is under constant threat, and I believe now political correctness, wokeness, is calling all the shots, and in many ways, unaccountable, very, very wealthy executives of the big social media companies in California and elsewhere are really deciding what we can and what we cannot say.
Absolutely.
If we go on some of these on the World Wide Web and say things, we can be removed immediately, and we've got no recourse. I mean,
the fact that I can't say I hate water because it dilutes the alcohol is really bothering me.
Mm-hmm. So we've got to be very protective of our right of freedom of speech, and there's a law on the English statute books at the moment that protests can be banned.
Yes, you're right, Harry. We actually be banned for right.
Yeah, protests can be banned if they're too noisy. Well, who decides that?
Yes.
Well, I mean, let's just rewind. I'm glad you mentioned the Scottish hate crime, but I will always bow to your greater knowledge, and I mean that seriously. But I thought it was actually enacted. It's not just a bill. It is actually now on the statute books. So it's got through the Scottish Parliament. A fearsome critic of it is the Harry Potter author,
yes,
J.K. Rowling, who immediately put in some test messages. One imagines on Twitter, it doesn't really matter, or X, whatever they call it, provoking, almost, inciting her own prosecution, testing whether what she wrote, which is her beef, is transgender, transsexual stuff. She will say openly to an ex-man purporting to be a female, sorry, you are a man, end of. And that actually, on the reading of the Act, that is prosecutable.
Absolutely, yeah.
And on my reading of the Act, and this is common with some things in English law, like offensive weapons and so on, they claim to have involved or included a defence to any charge, that it is justified and real, or words to that effect. So, in other words, rather like in defamation, there's always the defence of truth. However, the burden of proof, without doubt, in my ex-legal opinion, will switch to the person who's charged. And that person will have to show, on the balance of probabilities, that he or she were justified and correct and reasonable in saying what they did. And I have read, and I can imagine that, I mean, the police are tearing their hair out. It's as if we haven't got enough to do. And this is going, and because of what you rightly identify as PC stroke woke, although PC people tell me they're not woke, they seem to draw a distinction. I can't see one, but there we are. But, you know, they have to be very, very careful about what they say. And the whole thing about political correctness, if it's, but in this sense, dressed up as all sorts of discrimination, inciting hatred, you name it, the police will be forced by sheer politics to follow these complaints up, and it's going to increase their workload hugely.
Indeed.
It's Philippa and Harry, I know it's a serious issue, and Mirador really will not give way to these sort of things, but I do see Mirador as a sort of Hereward the Wake. And Hereward the Wake was a Saxon who he was a chief, a lord who was dispossessed by William the Conqueror, and he lurked in the fens and came out and harried the establishment, including, I may say, de Varenne, the Lord of Lewis, and he killed one of his relatives. And de Varenne went after Hereward the Wake in no uncertain terms. And as far as I'm aware, I didn't catch him. So I think that if we snipe from the sidelines, that we can start to make this legislation look idiotic. And that's the way to do it. Now, we're a bit older than you, Philip. So I have to say, I don't give a sod if somebody marches in now and throws me into jail. Let them do it. You're a bit younger and you've got more responsibilities than I have. But if they want to do that, that's the way actually to defeat stupid legislation like this is for innocent people to go to prison.
Yes, well, should that happen, Harry and I will be in the public gallery of Lewis Magistrates Court.
I should ask you to come out of retirement, Philip.
We'll both have your back, but that's where we'll be staying. Do you know, Keith, well, I don't know whether Harry's noticed this, but what is really amusing me is because of where your camera is, Harry and I are actually talking to some upright chairs. To the right, there's this old codger in a deerstalker with a silly grin on his face. The middle of the camera, there's a couple of Declan's upturned chairs.
Yes, well, the clean hasn't been in today yet. But I always think it's a bit like a French program that's done late at night, when the chairs are still on the table in the nightclub.
Well, that's how it looks. So Harry, the bills or statutes creeping in the English law, you identify them as what? Which?
Well, there were, I believe, a figure that is being bandied about, 150,000 hate crime incidents recorded last year in England.
Yes,
If they
I've
can,
seen. I think
if
I've seen that statistic.
150,000 hate crime incidents, well, that must mean there is a hate crime in England. And
Ah,
the police are obviously obliged to record this and spend time and maybe investigating some of them. Some of them, I'm sure, they file. But the implication, therefore, is that there are a tremendous number of hate crime, felonies. What's the proper word for
offences.
offences? Exactly. Yeah. That are on the books in England. I mean,
Yeah,
so
there are, but not
Mhm.
one of them
Mhm.
uses the word hate. In contrast to the new law in Scotland that uses the word hate big time.
Mhm.
In England, classic English, very piecemeal, make up your own mind whether something is a hate crime, and it is left to the police and the prosecutors to make a decision. So you've got religious, racially, gender aggravated offences.
Mhm.
They're already in place, but they're not under the umbrella of hate.
Mhm.
So hate crime in the legal sense in England, I wouldn't say it's a misnomer, but it's a label.
Well, it's a subjective term, isn't it? It depends.
Well, that's precisely the point.
Yeah. Mhm.
You know, I'll mention something completely tangential, but it's actually similar. Yesterday, Keith and I did a program with my neighbour John Prideaux, who is a real techno, runs a very successful technical advisory firm, and is well up on AI. So he talks to us about AI. Now, in Europe, there is now legislation coming in to control AI.
Mhm.
But his point was, well, it's a start, but it's an almost impossible thing to legislate for.
Mhm.
And I think that's similar with hate crime. What the English are doing, and this is why I hope we never get a hate act in England, is they are relying on the individual offence, and then they will decide whether it is a hate crime, whether it is racially aggravated, gender related, religiously aggravated. So at least in English law thus far, each crime can be defined and described.
Mhm. Well, that's true. And of course, this the old expression in the English language is that you cannot legislate morality.
No, you can't. No.
You can't say by law you have to be a nice person.
No, absolutely.
Or you have to behave in this way.
I'm sorry to come in with irrelevancies from time to time, but the reason that I've popped up our camera looking out on the high street is that patch of land, which is just a patch of land now, there was a windmill on it at the time of the Battle of Lewes in 1264, where one of the king's men took refuge after they were in retreat. But the Battle of Lewes is considered by historians and authenticated as being the first spark of English democracy, which spread across the world. And that is what's being threatened. The Battle of Lewes is where it started. And now we've got a whole bunch of people, legislators and God knows who all else, that are trying to end it.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely outrageous.
Well, it is really.
Look, gentlemen, or Keith, really. I'm going to call you the two chairs, okay? You have to strike a balance, surely, Keith. Some things should not be allowed to be said. I'm afraid I do think that. I think if you've got outrageous slurs and, yes, hatred expressed for entirely unbased reasons, that should be dealt with. You know, it's a matter of fact and degree, as the lawyers say, in each individual case. But that's the very point that Prideaux is making about AI.
Yeah.
How do you legislate for that?
Well, that's where this deep thinking has to take place. I mean, as in Lewis, at the time of de Varenne, is a priest, a knight, was thrown into a personal vault of a bishop because he'd mistreated one of his monks, and there was nobody to say you can't do that. You know, I mean, that we lived under those sort of strictures, and slowly we managed to get it to the point where I believe that we three have lived through much as criticism is vented, a golden age of democracy in this country. And I don't want to see that destroyed any more than you do. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying.
No,
But I
I'm
think
not misunderstanding.
you just got to be very careful about how we glide through it.
Yeah, I mean, we've moved on at quite a pace from Harry's original statements. I mean, just rewinding a bit. I mean, of course, in the days you've been talking about, Keith, it was feudalism, serfdom, it was the power of the barons, and so on. I think we do live in a different society now. But can there be too much democracy, Harry, in your view?
That's a tough question. It's a loaded question because democracy should be something that is pure in form and should not be diluted. Should we have too much freedom of behavior, I think would be a far easier parameter to attack. And of course, society needs to abide by a set of logical rules. And as we've become more civilized and advanced, we think, since feudal times, we believe we have, we've had to set up a set of laws which govern everything from our daily behavior to soccer matches and rugby games. I mean, so you do need rules in life to abide by. Otherwise, you get complete chaos. So I don't think it's a question. Democracy is a concept. It's the way it's put into practice is probably more the question of how you could regulate it. But I wouldn't like to see any inhibitions put on democracy itself. The right of people to express themselves and to determine the course of society by the majority will. That seems to be quite logic, and I wouldn't want to see that abrogated in any way, shape, or form. We've got into a phase, I think, in modern society where the people in charge, and in fact, that could be people in charge in a town like Lewis, or in a government like England or Scotland, they feel that to be useful, they've got to pass laws. And they've got to change things. They've got to try and leave their mark on society, and they develop laws that are in keeping with their thinking. If they're reactionary, they want reactionary laws. If they're traditionalists, they want to go back to a simpler time. That takes us down the road, of course, of trying to determine what's happened to British politics, because normally traditionalists would have been the conservatives, and the reactionaries wanting to change society for the better in their mind would have been the socialists. And but these traditional roles of each party have been so blurred and changed that you can't tell the difference between them. So there's simply they go to work, if you can call it work, being a representative of the people, and they feel that they have to pass all sorts of new laws on different issues. And life becomes much more constrained. We're living in a cage, not as free as we should be. So I think we're progressively losing individual freedoms to some notion of the collective good. But the collective good is so vague and so misapplied that in certain countries you get totalitarian government even for the good of the people.
Yes, quite.
So I wouldn't like to see democracy diluted in any way. Quite frankly, but what what worries me is the nature of the new rules. There's a catch-all word has become, for instance, racism. Now, racism, by definition, is if you take a negative view on somebody because of the color of their skin or their ethnic origin or what have you, then you become guilty of a crime. I would argue, and this is going to set the cat among the pigeons, if we don't insult the pigeons in doing that, racism is an essential tool of human expression. Because if in a society, a particular group of people who could be linked by ethnic origin, race, color, you name it, behave in a certain way that is contradictory to the values and traditions of the nation to which they've come, then collectively they can be accused of bringing new values or new way of saying things, a new religion in many ways. I think it should be very healthy to condemn the Islamic religion if it is contrary to the tenets of the Christian religion, if we're a Christian nation. If we're a Christian nation, which of course we are less and less. But we have a right to define ourselves in racial terms. So the idea of racism being a crime is absolutely contradictory. If we had a family next door that was constantly destroying the quality of our lives, we would refer to the family next door. I'm not talking about ethnic origins, color of skin, or anything like that. Just if they were just a typical British family, a bunch of problem makers, we would collectively refer to them as that, and we would label them that. What's wrong with that? If people wish to change and upend our manner of living, our way of living, and impose new traditions upon us, well, yeah, let's be racist. I'd like to somebody tell me what's wrong with being a racist if it contradicts what are basically our own identity represents to us. Now, that we should be open enough to listen and to see if they bring improvement. But if they don't, why can't we collectively reject those people? Is that a racist remark?
No, it's not.
Am I guilty of racism by saying that?
Racism, as you point out, has a very specific definition, and it is based on ethnicity. It doesn't have to be relating to a black person, a brown person, a yellow person. Many white people would fall under that term as well.
But if can I interrupt a second, Philip? But if it can be linked to a particular group of people who come into our country, into our society, and perform practices collectively that are alien to our values, why are we guilty if we resist that? Or we say, no, we don't want our society to change down that directions? Or are we obliged through whatever these woke or politically correct values are to say, well, that's their way of doing things, therefore we must accept that? And if
that's your point. That's your point about multiculturalism.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It goes back to that, because the multiculturalism you tell me adopted in Canada and visible in the UK is effectively a ghettoization.
Absolutely.
So therefore, anybody who says, that bunch of Muslims over there praying to Allah in that weird mosque, encouraging their extremists to chop our heads off, unfortunately, that would be deemed racist.
Well, exactly. And I mean, we, I hope, as a nation, care about animals. But there we have a religion which is now becoming quite prevalent in Britain that believes in slitting the throats of animals as a ceremonial way of killing them instead of killing them humanely. Is that acceptable to us? And
well, it's not acceptable to me as an individual.
No, but it is something that is performed by a collective group of people. So if we condemn them collectively, we are being racist according to the new laws.
Well, if you and I went on a demonstration in the middle of, say, Birmingham, protesting about the halal killing, inhumane killing of animals, and incidentally, the Jews do similar. I don't think our demonstration would be deemed racist. It would be a legal democratic right to protest against such a, in our view, brutal, dark age process. I don't think we would be called racist.
No.
It's the practice of what they're doing that we're protesting against.
Yes.
They could be pink with black spots as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, but if that particular practice was indigenous to a group of people that can be commonly collectivized either by color, ethnic origin, religious persuasion, and we condemn that practice in that collective context, we're being racist. I don't buy that.
I don't believe that in the silly example, well, it's not a silly example. If we were part of a group of people who went on the streets to oppose and complain about that particular practice, which happens to be accepted for both ethnic and religious reasons within that particular community, we have the right to protest against that as long as we keep away from the ethnicity. It's the practice, isn't it?
We have the right to do that in Britain right now, but in many countries where these people come from, they do not have the right to do that.
That's a valid but rather different point.
We are progressively seeing our nation transformed from what it was into an environment which more resembles where these people come from than our traditional values. Now, what I'm saying, I fear, under the current customs and behavior and acceptable things that you're allowed to say, I could be accused of being racist by saying these things. But I'm not racist. I couldn't give a toot about the color of a person's skin.
Well, that's the point.
And in fact, I'd stopped noticing this.
Yes,
30, 40 years ago, until they started raising it against them again to bring some sort of political and moral pressure on people like myself. I'd stopped noticing that. I thought we'd become a multicultural society. But Black Lives Matter and people like that have just capitalized on this to bring it all back to the forefront of political thinking. And
what would happen, Harry, if you carried or I carried a sign around saying, "I don't care if you're a Muslim"?
I don't care. I don't care what anybody is.
I don't either. What if I carried a sign around under this new legislation, as I understand it, I'd be racist?
Yes. But they have a right to be whatever they want to be. I mean, I don't care what you say about me. Just spell my name correctly.
I mean, Keith, two chairs. Look, just reflect on what you just said. Firstly, do you mean if you were doing it in Scotland?
Do what? Sorry.
Right. You're walking around with a placard. You imagine, and on that placard it says, "I don't care if you're a Muslim."
Yeah.
Right. What is racist about that?
Well, all I'm saying is that if you actually, to me, this legislation almost demands that you say what you're not. And that, to me, as you point out, is the moment I say it, you think Keith's being a racist. Well, it's absolute nonsense. It is rubbish. Because if you just flip the coin, it turns everybody into racist.
But that's the point I'm making, Keith.
Yeah.
And so we can all we're border on racism by having this discussion.
Yes, indeed.
And that is wrong. That is not freedom of speech. That is not democracy. That everybody has a right to be who they are, and as long as they follow the basic values and traditions of the country that welcomes them, instead of trying to impose their practices.
I'm just going to let Chef in.
Okay, right. But this is my worry, that we're getting less and less freedom to debate issues like this, because if we take a position, then we can be accused of being racist. And I do not honestly think of myself as being racist.
I don't sense you are a racist. You're not.
I put that behind me years and years ago. We all had our little biases when we were young, but I've lived long enough to see society evolve and see how everybody's equal and in the eyes of God, if you wish. I keep referring to God, and I'm an atheist, but I mean,
that's what atheists tend to do, funnily enough.
I'm using that as an expression. So I want them to have all the same rights that I've got. I just don't want to have some extraneous influences imposed upon me simply by the not invasion. That's there we go again. Invasion, million immigrants a year. I suppose that's invasion. The imposed.
Yes, but the ethnic makeup of the UK is
Britain.
The ethnic makeup. I'm sorry, I'm talking over you. I apologise.
No, that's okay.
The ethnic makeup of the UK is not entirely to do with immigration. Well, it is if you go back centuries, but you may agree it's not just about current immigrants.
Well, no, it's not. But what has happened? In fact, Britain is a nation of immigrants, historically.
Absolutely.
Historically. And what has happened is these waves have come in and they've been absorbed. There have been changes that brought benefits. They've brought, just as modern immigrants can bring benefits and new ideas. I think we need a kick in the ass sometimes, and that's probably a good thing that this is happening. And so we've evolved, but you can't suddenly absorb this volume of people and expect your traditions to remain intact.
No, you cannot. No, that's right. So
now my point being, going back to point number one, by saying that, am I being racist? By law, I'm borderline. I could be accused of what I'm really saying is I don't like all these people coming in from such and such a country. I'm not saying that. I'm trying to say.
Well, if you were to make it crystal clear that what your objection was to is the threat to your way of life, the threat to your traditions, then I don't see that as being racist. I don't think any rational mind, other than the loonies in the community you are complaining about, any rational mind, least of all legal mind, would accuse you of being racist.
Well, I worry about that because that's the card that these people play when you make this kind of a statement.
They do play the race card. We know that and I'm afraid it's played generally by people of colour.
Or people who seek to ingratiate themselves, or what have you, or have got these modernistic views of not reactionary views. They if you see the people parading in the streets on behalf of Gaza at the moment, I mean, it's amazing. A lot of them look like basic Anglo-Saxon types. I mean, they've never been near Gaza, I mean, there was one homosexuals for Gaza. I mean, if they lived in Gaza, they'd have their heads cut off, if not something else. You know?
Yeah, they would be emasculated, quite right. But see, that's a classic example of a soapbox for a particular type in our society gaining or trying to gain publicity for the fact that he or they are homosexuals, and they want people to know that that's what they are, and they are supporting Gaza and the Palestinians. I mean, this, you may agree, is another example of democracy and free speech.
Well, may I just go down one of my famous red herrings, going back to your mentioning of animals. I worked in Armenia several times, and they, of course, embraced Christianity, the first nation ever to embrace it as a state religion, way back in 600. So they've got a lot of very interesting churches, and there is one cathedral carved in the rock that I was taken to, and there they practice Christianity. Christianity, I suppose, going back to Jewish times, and they actually sacrifice still a sheep. And hordes and hordes of people there to watch this ceremony. And I said to my hostess, I can't stay for this. I can't possibly watch a sheep or even hear it from, having its throat cut. And I left. But it was totally acceptable in Armenian society that, they just slip this, and they did it at a certain time and advertised it so that people would go and watch it. It's just an interesting sidebar to our discussion.
Well, we would see that, I think, as retrograde. It was something that we should have moved on from such barbaric practices as that. And certainly, if it's done in the name of a religion which preaches gentle behavior and turn the other cheek, to kill, and has within its laws, "Thou shalt not kill." It seems a very odd contradiction in terms that they would behave like that. I mean, we talked about.
It shows the power of religious beliefs in some parts of the world, Harry.
Yes, well, of course it does, and religion is a fairly scary thing, and religion can apply to political thought just as an ideological thought, just as much as it can to spiritual thought. Yeah. So.
Yes. I mean, the example Keith is citing, they would say, is entirely based on the Bible. Fundamental biblical belief and practice. And they would say that the Ten Commandments do not include animals.
Well, the Bible, of course, is a tough one to handle because it's actually two books in one, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And in the Old Testament, you've got exhortation to smite thy neighbor and kill them, and rejoicing in the slaughter by the hundreds of thousands of the infidels and this kind of thing, which doesn't sort of jibe with modern Christianity, with the modern values of the Christian religion. And then you get, it was written, what one must assume, the Old Testament in the spirit of the times. And even the New Testament has to be sort of interpreted in more modern ways than at the time it was written. The Gospels were written when values were different to the ones we have now. So interpretation of the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament, I would imagine, has to be figurative. It has to be a guideline that we try to apply to our modern society as it has evolved, by sticking with the basic tenets of faith in the Bible. Same thing with the other religions. I mean, we seem to be focused on the Christian religion, but there are many religions around the world that provide a necessary structure to life to the people where they're practiced. And they need to be respected too. The need for religions to respect each other But a religion becomes, in the Old Testament sense of having to predominate and slaughter the opposition. I do not think that is the kind of, that becomes more of an ideology than a religion and should be resisted. And you will get in the clash of, I mean, how silly it was in the religious wars in the 1500s in France, that pitted Catholic against Protestant when they both had the same God. I mean, can you imagine how silly all that was?
Well, it always is silly.
Mhm.
It's the same in Northern Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same all over the world.
Mm-hmm. So if religion leads to conflict, if there's one thing going for the Christian religion, it's the theory of turning the other cheek, and acceptance of the other person's beliefs. Evangelical Christianity seeks to convert them, but not by force, by persuasion, by argument, by logic if they can, but not to impose it by law. And when we have teachers who lose their jobs, or in France lost their heads because of taking a particular stance in religious terms, that is not freedom of speech. It's not. It's not freedom of education. It's not openness. It's not a democratic approach to searching what are the best common values for everybody. It is ideological totalitarianism and should be resisted. And if that is embodied in a particular race or group of people, they should be resisted. And therefore, I argue that that makes us guilty of racism by current racism definition. We say we don't like collectively a certain group of people because of that. And very often within that group of people, there is a resistance themselves. Because the ones that are trying to impose that by force are the extremists. And let's see if we can put this in terms. I strongly suspect, I don't know enough about it, but I would strongly suspect that 9 out of 10 Muslims are gentle people who do not want the extremists to control their religion. But
I'm in no doubt you're right.
And these are good people. They just want to fit into society. They've chosen to come to Britain. They've chosen, or wherever they've gone to. And we shouldn't necessarily be talking only of Britain. As the world becomes more homogeneous, they've gone where they are. They take their values with them, but they also integrate into society, and they don't buy the extremist approach of some of their brethren. And yet that's what's happening. And that is what's happening in the Middle East right now. It's what's happening with the support for Gaza. We get very reasonable people in Britain supporting extremism. I find that mind-boggling. I mean,
hang on, Harry. Pause, sir, if you may. I don't see demonstrations which involve whites from Britain as well as Palestinians, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see them demonstrating against Israeli atrocities. That's not supporting Hamas, is it?
That's a tough one, because that takes us down a particular path. The term Israeli atrocities, the Israelis are fighting a war, an existential war, and in a war, and certainly in a modern war, you get casualties. You very often get unwanted casualties, such as these poor aid workers that recently died. But that's collateral damage in a war. It happens. The actual number of deaths in urban warfare that are occurring in Israel are roughly 1.5 from what we can determine. And in normal urban warfare carried out indiscriminately, it could go as high as 1 in 8 or 1 in 9. So the Israelis would appear to be statistically fighting with at least one hand tied behind their back, if not partially with the other hand tied behind their back. The so-called atrocities are, however small an atrocity is, it's awful, but it seems to be very minor in terms of what would normally be the case in urban warfare. So the very term Israeli atrocity is in itself a political statement.
It probably is.
It,
It
it,
probably is. But an atrocity.
I do not see a collective nature of Israeli atrocities in Gaza. They're trying to root out. I mean, the BBC, which to my mind is a disaster, you know, in terms of unbiased reporting, they talk about the attack on the hospital in Rafah, and they say it took 2.5 months to get control of the hospital. And then they say, look at these, there were nurses and doctors and people killed. Well, I mean, they weren't defending the hospital. Who was defending the hospital? Why did it take 2.5 months to capture a hospital? Unless it was
because it was riddled with Hamas terrorists.
And terrorists and hundreds of thousands of not hundreds of thousands, silly statement, but thousands of fanatical terrorists. This is a war, and it's a war that Israel is fighting on our behalf, just as like the Ukrainians are fighting a war on our behalf against Russian aggression. And if we don't help them, the Russians are going to come for us, and it's our kids that are going to be dying in the streets, or our children, everybody. And the same thing in Israel. We know who's behind it. We know Iran is behind it. We know who's causing all the shots in the Middle East, and soon they're going to have atomic bombs. I mean, and as is Israel trying to fight our war for us, and we're now talking about withdrawing support from Israel. I mean, I'm no big fan of Israel. Israel is Israel. I mean, it's just another country to me. But I do think we're getting our values mixed up when we're trying to stop them, ceasefire, push for a ceasefire, allow Hamas to regroup, and then recreate the mayhem that they did before. It's not even in our own interest to do that. We should allow Israel to go through with it and keep its minimum casualty rate. So far from Israeli atrocities, and I think they're doing an incredible job to keep them down, keep the figures down. And the figures, by the way, again coming to the BBC and many of the news outlets, they use the figures supplied by Hamas. They don't use figures that don't even, and some of these figures don't even stand up in proportion. Some days it would seem that no men have been killed, only hundreds and hundreds of women and children. Well, come on. I mean, how naive can we be? And we propagate figures put forward by Hamas, and so it changes public opinion. Now everybody's calling for a ceasefire. And Israel's got to be allowed to go on and clean out this hornet's nest in our own interest. And if that means some people dying, that's what war is all about. Because if they don't die now, many more people, including ourselves, our own people, will die as a result. That's an expression of opinion. Racist? I'm not sure whether that is.
No. There's nothing racist in what you said.
We're not going back to.
Is invariably based on your usual excellent research and knowledge, and it's very persuasive. It's rather shut me up. I very much take your point. Whether the one man and his dog that might watch this program the dog might agree with us. But who knows?
Well, I'm not proposing we go back to refer to a Jewish circumcision with in biblical terms with a sharp stone. I'm not suggesting we go back to that, but unless we're prepared to fight and die for our values, and both Keith and I grew up at a time when when our fathers and uncles and everybody were being slaughtered to put down the Nazi threat, would young British people lay their lives on the line for that? No.
Well, we
They
discussed
would.
this some
They
weeks
would.
ago, and I don't believe they would.
No, they'd make for the new model iPhone, perhaps, but not for freedom or democracy or moral values. It certainly wouldn't.
Well, I'm not being funny, and it is only just a slight interference. But there aren't many television stations like Mirador where there isn't an upper body censoring what their presenters or their correspondents on say. People have total freedom who come on here to debate and argue the way that we are now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if the BBC and ITV and Al Jazeera and France 24 or whatever, if they all took the same attitude, it would be a much greater weapon against bias and discrimination and everything else than lifting up a fist or a rifle.
Well, I think so, and I think that's a very good analysis, Keith. You put it extremely well. We do express ourselves, and I've said before on these programs, I don't know whether I'm right. I'm simply expressing the thoughts and feelings, emotions that come from the collective information that I have got, that has influenced me, that I have analyzed, and I come up with these thoughts, and so I explain them publicly, just as I would in the local pub or something if I was chatting with somebody. But there's no guarantee that I'm right, and certainly I'm very open to the fact that if a counter argument will soften my views or then I will absorb other people's opinions. We don't know it all. Anybody who thinks they know it all is crazy. But it is a welcome opportunity to express yourself openly, which very few media outlets permit anymore. In fact, back to point number one at the beginning, you can't express yourself openly in the public space anymore because you're accused of bias, of racism, of some sort of a hate crime, we're not open enough. We're becoming a much more controlled and directed society than, certainly in Orwellian terms, it would seem to me. Orwellian is an overused word at the moment, but by golly, did that guy get it right when he forecast the way society would go?
Yeah.
There's a brand new version of 1984 coming out soon. An updated film. How you can update such a brilliant storyline, I'm not quite sure, but they try. Eric Blair was a true prophet, wasn't he?
Well, it's worth reading Orwell, not just for 1984, and it's worth reading Orwell a lot for many of his smaller essays, his pamphlets that he put out, not even books. And you can see the amazing ability to analyze the future that this guy had. And obviously 1984 was the one that made his name, but quite remarkable. But now it almost seems commonplace, and history being cyclical. We talked about Stalin. We're now talking about Putin, and
of course.
It just goes round and round in a never-ending circle.
Well, Animal Farm is absolutely spot on.
Absolutely, yeah. But I've read two-page pamphlets of Orwell, which are an amazing brief, 2 pages analysis of a given situation. I can't remember.
Where have you found those, Harry?
You can find them on the internet for a start. I did find them. I found a collection of them in a library once and spent several hours in the library reading them. but I'm sure you could find them on the internet now. Pamphlets by George Orwell, because the great age of pamphleteers was towards the end of the 19th century.
Yeah.
The Zolas and others, and of course, again, the great cartoon era, pamphleteer era. 18th, late 18th and 19th century, right through the 19th century to until the beginning of the 20th century. In point of fact, so he was following a tradition which was an established intellectual literary tradition, Orwell, and in many ways, he was a product of his time. He saw into the future, but he was not futuristic. He was. He had the values, genuine left-wing values that are so important to be maintained. Where the left did have a noble cause, where there was a desperate need for a leveling out of equality and my grandfather was a leading union leader in the mining business from Yorkshire, and a wonderful man. And at a time when these values needed to be brought forward, and society given a better sense of balance. But now we've gone far too far. I mean, could you say now what the Labour Party stands for? I mean, we know that the Conservative Party are a bunch of rabble, and they don't stand for anything. The sooner they host out, the better. But the Socialist Party, they don't even have to come forward to the program because the Conservatives are busy self-destructing. So all they've just got to do is sit and wait. But
Harry, it doesn't matter which party, because I agree with you. Neither of them are really worth very much at the moment. But something you said earlier is about being careful about legislation, no matter how worthy it may seem. Mm-hmm. And I mean, my mind is cast back to the legislation making things easier for black people in the States. It started what's called reverse discrimination. Mm-hmm. The legislation giving the First Nation rights in Canada has created huge resentment. And indeed, any legislation to do with French Canadians has not helped the situation, or because it's done with good intentions, but because it's not thought out carefully. And I think that's one of the things that we should be fighting against right now is, okay, if your legislation in Scotland or in England seems very well and in good intentions, why not give it a year or two and put it under a real microscope to make sure that it is?
Well, I agree with that, but at the moment, I'm afraid that if you're white, Anglo-Saxon, and male, you're an endangered species.
Yes.
And heterosexual.
Yeah, yes, heterosexual, white Anglo-Saxon male. I mean, you might as well kiss your ass goodbye because there's nobody. And we're a disappearing phenomenon.
Well, I'm not so sure that I'm against that, because I like belonging to exclusive clubs.
Yes.
Well, we can call ourselves a persecuted minority now, can't we?
Well,
we could get all sorts of funding. I mean,
Yes.
They've done the black one-legged lesbians for years. Now we've got, white Anglo-Saxon, heterosexual, whatevers.
Well, I don't know that we need any funding. I think I'd be satisfied with free beer.
Yes.
I
don't think Declan would be too chuffed about that, but there we are.
I mean, that raises a real kind of worms. why do people get grants to do things? Either what they're doing is worthwhile or it's not. Why should somebody else be paying for what they want to impose on the rest of us?
Yeah. Well,
Well,
Harry,
again,
we
it's an
didn't get
entirely
a
subjective
penny in
question.
grants to start a rugby club 60 years ago, and look at it now, absolutely flourishing.
Absolutely, and it flourishes because the people after us, we did what we need. We launched it, but a lot of those young fellas who are now old retirees, amazing, isn't it? You know, they were all young students at the time. They worked very hard to take it over 2 or 3 generations to take
Yes, and kept most of the values that we
absolutely
started.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that pride is a dangerous emotion, but it should give us a nice warm feeling in our trousers that we in our rugby shorts that rugby.
But hang on, a nice warm feeling in your trousers means you're incontinent.
Keeps you sitting down longer.
Well, when I was a child, there was an expression that what was it? That's right, Harwich. There was publicity on the old railway system. Harwich for the continent, it said, and Torquay for the incontinent.
Well, I wonder whether it has anything to do with what we're talking about now. Is that we can't seem to keep anybody under 50 on Mirador.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're all 50 or over.
Well, that's not good either. I mean,
no, it's not.
Mirador.
I'm pointing out that it's a fact.
Well, hang on, Keith. Susie's not 50.
She is.
No.
She's not far off.
Bloody hell. God dear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're all rather well preserved, to be quite honest with you.
She's aged well. Good heavens.
Well, community television, which I think is a good thing, and it's a niche market, obviously, but it would be fun to get younger people on. We need to
Harry. We've had in the years that it's been open, we've had young people come, and we've tried to train them and to show them what it's all about, and they are sent out of university with some vague idea of what they're going to do is they're going to come in and they're going to sit at the top table and dictate, and they get frustrated when they find that they're asked to get the coffee to start off with, just to learn the trade. And the last pair we had, strange enough, was Scottish, and that was in the White Hart, so not so very long ago. Full of enthusiasm, yes, and sort of drifted away and didn't like what they saw. But we actually don't force our values onto people, but it becomes obvious that we have some pretty decent values on this station, and one of them is free speech.
I'm sure we do, but it would be wrong for a bunch of old fogies like us to dominate the philosophical direction of Mirador. It would be good
we put out ads on social media that we're here, that they come and join us, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It's only people of the post-computer age, I put it, who seem to be interested.
Well, of course, the danger is, as you mentioned, universities, because so many of these universities are churning out kids that have got strange ideas, which have got nothing to do with what is in their interest for themselves and for the interest of society. I close half of the universities, in my opinion, and save a lot of money and get the kids out to work. But that makes me an old reactionary again.
Maybe it's old, but I think it's the modern generation that are reactionary.
Yeah. That's it. But let's go back to good old de Varenne, who the great seigneur of Lewis. He had a solution for people who didn't fit in well. He used to cut off their left foot, and he was left in charge while William went back to Normandy to sort out the Duke of Brittany, who was getting a bit stroppy. And so he left de Varenne in charge. And when he came back, he saw all these guys hobbling around with missing a foot. So he said, "What's all this about?" So de Varenne told him, he said, "Well, sire, they were rebelling, so I cut off their left foot."
But his wife was building an abbey, a priory, so he was forgiven.
So he promoted him. So, and if you see anybody wandering around with a left foot now, it's probably due to the waiting list on the NHS. But I mean, that's it. So,
well, gentlemen, I've had a remarkable morning because John Henty, on a much lighter side, has gone off at the invitation of the BBC, because in I think it's the Dome in Brighton they are today broadcasting or recording a broadcast of the ABBA concert of the European Song Contest, which hurtled them to fame.
Okay.
And he was as Radio Brighton. He was in the audience, or as a member of the press, at that very first concert. And they dug him out and said, "Oh, please, you were here. Come and tell us what it was like."
Yeah, no,
and that's what and then we've come on to what is always very powerful conversation, particularly between you and Philip. I always sit on the sidelines because I sit in awe of the two of you and just poke my nose in once in a while when I think that I've got something sensible to say. But the Mirador's programs of this sort, and we try to model them on this, are gaining purchase amongst viewers. And actually, it's amazing the number of people that I get on other social media from other parts of the world who are watching us. I'm delighted that we have such spirited conversations and such interesting topics, because it may be that we are not Coronation Street, but we are certainly important to an awful lot of people, more than Philip's dog. I'm so pleased that we have days like this, as they say.
Well, I
don't have a dog, Keith.
No, it's your one man and his dog.
Yes, well, that's
you like to quote.
That's the figure of speech.
As long as we don't take ourselves too seriously, but
no, you're quite right, Harry. I mean, it is. I actually brace myself for social media comment that is, you bunch of idiots, and maybe we are. But the fact is that we're a bunch of idiots with conviction, and we have a vehicle in which we can express our convictions, and nobody will say us nay. They can come on at any time, have the ability to come on at any time, and then publicly tell us that we're a bunch of idiots.
Are you saying that you have had comments on whatever media platform that we are a bunch of idiots?
No. As a matter of fact, I haven't had people say we're a bunch of idiots, but some people sort of, particularly for the young who love using these troll medias, is what a waste of space. But it's amazing the number of people that come on that find what we talk about intriguing and well worthwhile watching.
Well, the extraordinary thing is, and it took me by surprise, my wife's nephew, who is 17, very talented musician already, he was home of late, and his father, my wife's brother Jonathan, said he'd like a couple of links to our programs. I thought, yeah, great, you know. Anyway, when I last spoke to Jonathan, he basically said to me, Elliot loves it. Absolutely. He sits and watches you, not just you, Phil, but he sits and watches Mirador on the links you send. And all I hear is laughter. And he's 17. So I don't think we...
Well, is he laughing at us, though? I mean,
I just think he finds the banter funnier. But no, he's a very genuine lad. And like I say, very intelligent, talented lad. But yeah, maybe he is just laughing at us. But why not? I mean,
absolutely.
You know, I mean,
I suspect that there are an awful lot of younger people who laugh with us because I do get. I mean, obviously, because I'm in Lewis, I get more direct approaches than you do. But I get people of all ages mentioning, "Oh, I saw you this morning," or "That was an interesting program," or you know, "I'm sorry I had to move on," or whatever. No, I don't think that we appeal just to the old. The point I was making about us being all over 50 is that we're it's our work ethic. We are willing to get elbow grease going and from the ground upwards. I mean, you know, Harry, I'm not sure whether you know how I started this, but Melissa in New York said to me one day after we'd been playing around with it a little bit, she said, you know, Facebook is coming out with a new thing where you can broadcast on your phone, but only Hollywood stars are going to get it. I'll let you know when it becomes, it's bound to come out into the public domain. I'll let you know. But she did. And I got a mobile phone and I went and sat outside the coffee shop at 5:30 in the morning, doing little interviews with people that go by and little editorials. We are now not exactly NBC or BBC or whatever, but we are a long, long way ahead from where we were. And it's because of the tenacity and perspicacity of people such as yourselves, giving me your talent and your time and your effort. And either younger people haven't got the time or they haven't got the talent.
Well, it's good to hear. It's good to hear. But again, I go back to the argument that we shouldn't take ourselves too seriously. I mentioned, I think, on a previous program, the famous Shavian quote that youth is wasted on the young. So by the time we've got something that we think is worth saying, we're old fuddy-duddies and our time is perhaps past. We're on borrowed time in some cases.
Nobody's time will ever pass, Harry.
I mean, look, first of all, people laughing at us. I mean, look at Keith, okay? Lurking on the side of the camera, wearing a bloody deerstalker inside a pub, whereas the central vision is 2 chairs. I mean, who wouldn't laugh at that? It's Python-esque. You don't even need the volume.
And terrorize the pavements with my scooter.
Yeah, well, John Prideaux is working. Now he knows it's a mobility. I don't think he realised it's a mobility scooter. So I think by the time we see him in a fortnight, you may be very amused by what he's come up with on AI. Now he knows it's a mobility scooter. But no, I've learned some really good sayings from you, Harry. But the one I love is, it's not the cough that carries you off. It's the coffin they carry you off in.
Exactly.
I love that. Is just brilliant.
Well, I didn't invent that. That's an old saying, but it's worth repeating from time to time.
Yeah. And Harwich for the continent.
Are we on deck on Monday?
Indeed, we are.
Yeah.
We're back to. Well, I'm tampering with the schedule just a little bit because Philip, God bless him, has offered to give more time to. I mean, he'll turn away and he gets all churned up. But Philip had never done any broadcasting until he came on Mirador, and he's turned out to be a first-class broadcaster, as indeed have you. I just, after 60 years in the business, I have the ability to spot people who are appealing to audiences. And I think Philip is beginning to realize that he's much better than he thought he was, and he's going to lend some more time. So I'm working on the schedules at the moment because I'm not going to let him escape.
Yeah, look,
I don't want to do 5 days a week.
No. All I've offered is if you don't, I mean, I had no idea the effort you have to make to get down there and set everything up. All I'm offering, particularly on a Wednesday, when Susie comes on early, I can anchor Wednesday for as long as you like. So I'm not trying to jump the gun. I'm just trying to take a bit of pressure off you.
Philip, you know me long enough now to know that what you offer and what I actually am looking to take are two different things.
You've made that quite clear. Yes. And you know,
I've got Harry agreeing to two days a week now. So I'm probably going to make this a regular thing twice a week. It's just a question of which day.
What, with Harry?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Well, if Harry wants to, Harry could do one with you and one with me.
You know, I sit on the sidelines. I'm nowhere near the intellectual capacity of you two.
Harry's knowledge, opinions, his questions, the issues he raises, I'm worn out. I can only handle it once a week. You know, I'm not like you two. You're Supermen. I'm a knackered 66-year-old. So, you know. Anyway, Harry, can you do Monday?
Yes, I can. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Lovely. All right. Well, I will rope you in on Monday, as long as Mr. Keith can get off the wagon in time for me to do a live stream. But Keith, back to where we started. Facebook.
Yes.
We can't lose Facebook.
Now, I'm going to see if I can get the experts to do it because I've been in, and the person that actually put it up was somebody who worked for Mirador 4 or 5 years ago. I have no idea what the passwords are.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, I mean, these things happen with small. The one thing that we really need more of are human resources, and as I've just said, they're few and far between. You know, the people who like the elbow grease have dropped off the perch, and the generation that we would love to recruit aren't willing to put in the elbow grease. So that's a problem we've got to get around. But anyway, that's dirty washing, and we shouldn't air that in the public.
No, I quite agree. So I'm going to say toodle pip to the public.
Okay.
I will then end the stream, and then could you gentlemen stay on? Bye bye.
Okay. Bye everybody.